Good afternoon and welcome to the Midday News. Here's what we have in the bulletin. JTA responds to calls for schools closure due to spike in COVID cases. Jamaica remains fifth most corrupt country in the Caribbean. And later in sports, Rafael Nadal battles to reach the Australian Open semifinals. I'm Giovanni Dennis and here are the details. Should schools remain open despite the rise in COVID-19 cases? That question is re-emerging this afternoon as educators across the island insist that students need to remain in the physical classroom to address learning loss. Now, some health experts have been stepping up the pressure on the government to close schools again amidst an increase in hospitalization among children.
To keep schools open or not? That's the question being debated in light of the fourth wave of COVID-19. President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, Winston Smith, says the matter of learning loss should not be treated lightly.
As it is now, we have to protect the educational prospect of all our students. And we're saying that we understand that we're in a pandemic. We understand that we're in a difficult position. But I am of the view, and we at the JT, and I've had discussion with our principals and our teachers, and we are of the view that we need to continue pressing ahead until we are at a point where we just cannot go any further.
Mr. Smith says adequate information should be provided to school administrators if the government is considering another lockdown for schools.
We have not been getting a whole-scale report from our members to say that the schools are in a dire situation, and as such, we should call or ask for a complete shutdown. So if the Ministry of Health has that data, we'll be very happy if they would forward it to us so that we can work together, because it is not education versus health. It is all of us working together collectively and collaboratively for the good of the country.
In the meantime, President of the Jamaica Association of Principals of Secondary Schools, Linvern Wright, says while learning loss remains a major concern, the issue of funding to public schools also needs to be addressed. The issue was discussed on the morning agenda on Power 106. Herman Green, TVJ.
Jamaica remains the fifth most corrupt country in the Caribbean. That, according to the 2021 Corruption Perception Index CPI report. At a virtual launch of the report today, the National Integrity Action said an action plan is needed to address corruption. Sandy Williams reports.
On a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 means highly corrupt and 100 means very clean, for 2021, Jamaica scored 44, the same figure that the country scored in 2020. Head of the National Integrity Action, NIA, Professor Trevor Monroe, says this means that Jamaica is well below the pass mark for corruption.
When we match the positives as a result of great effort and the deficits, it turns out that on Corruption Perception Index 2021, Jamaica is literally found to be standing still, to be marking time, to be treading water beneath the surface of integrity. We're therefore the fifth worst in the Caribbean. This is not where we belong.
The 2021 Transparency International Corruption Ranking showed that the country slipped one place from 69th in 2020 to 70th in 2021 out of 180 countries.
We are ranking number 8 of 12 Caribbean countries in terms of the levels of integrity. We are ranked behind Barbados, behind the Bahamas, behind St. Vincent, behind St. Lucia, behind a number of countries, including Cuba. Only we're above, in performance, only above Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, and Haiti.
Two targets in the anti-crime agreement that was established by the Consensus Management Oversight Committee in 2021 were not met in accordance with the timeline.
That unexplained West order requirement, which probably would need an amendment to the Proceeds of Crime Act. In fact, that's what it requires, or a constitutional amendment remains to be done. Similarly, if not more importantly, the Enhanced Security Measures Act, ESMA, which should have been laid in Parliament to ensure that our security forces have the authority and strength to deal with the gangs more effectively and the gunmen and the violence producers. That ESMA still is not amongst the government of Jamaica's priorities in the latest listing of the legislative priorities.
The NIA boss believes this may have contributed to Jamaica's stagnant position in the Corruption Perceptions Index, CPI. He says Jamaica needs to redouble its efforts to curb corruption in the country.
Our effort now has to be, for 2022, to redouble our efforts, to hold power to account, to have our people participate, to ensure greater transparency and accountability. Specifically, we need to make certain that the Public Bodies Management Accountability Act is enforced and the chronic breaches by public bodies of our reporting requirements need to be brought to book. That such persons need to be brought before the courts and sanctioned.
Sandy Williams, TVJ News.
Craft vendors in Montego Bay, St. James say the COVID-19 pandemic continues to affect their business. They say they would usually make most of their money from cruise ships, but very few vessels have arrived in the ports in recent months. O'Shane Masters has their story.
Padlocked shops, empty walkways, the scene at the Old Fort Craft Market in St. James. The issue? No cruise ships calling at the Montego Bay port since about mid-December last year. The craft vendors say they are worried as their livelihoods are now in jeopardy.
They depend on the tourists them may come off of the ship we come buy from me because no tourists now come in our market here. You have to buy nothing. How much week me come sit down out here so. I don't see no tourists at all. I have my bills them to pay. My rent gone up sky high, I can't pay it.
It was going to hit my members because everybody was kind of sharpening up and looking forward to either have the business here or we go on display.
The vendors were hopeful as the cruise sector was shuttered for almost 18 months with the resumption in August last year due to the pandemic. But with the Omicron variant now running rampant across the globe, cruise companies are now wary of travel. Delano Sivrite is senior strategist within the tourism ministry.
Montego Bay has been slow in getting off the ground as it relates to cruise visits compared to, say, Ocho Rios and Palma. But beyond that, given the situation caused by Omicron, there were some cruises that have been scheduled, but because of the Omicron problem on board some of these cruise ships, which surpass their threshold, they are unable to dock in Montego Bay. So certainly for the next 2 to 4 weeks, we will probably continue to see some of those issues.
Jamaica's viability has also been shattered following an advisory from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, on January 24, which elevated its advisory, warning Americans about the risk of traveling to Jamaica because of a rising number of COVID-19 cases. However, Mr. Sivrite doesn't believe that the designation by the CDC will have a severe effect on tourist travels.
Most Americans make up their own minds as it relates to travel, and more of the decision is dependent on whether they're going to get stuck in the destination or so on, rather than looking at the CDC travel advisories.
On Monday, the CDC moved Jamaica to its highest risk travel category for COVID-19. The island is now categorized as level 4 or very high risk. For the vendors, they are hoping that the hotels in the area will fill the void from the cruise sector.
My expectation is to see a little business, even from the hotel or somewhere else coming here. It may not quite enough for us, but at least we would like to see something come here that we can earn a little dollar to do what we have to do.
O'Shane Masters, TVJ News.
Professor Alvin Wint has been appointed as board chairman of the Hart NSTA Trust. Professor Wint's appointment comes just a week after the Jamaica Education Transformation Commission report made several recommendations for a review of the operations of the entity. Former chairman of Hart, Edward Gabidon, resigned last month following questions over a possible conflict of interest arising from contracts awarded to his company and the spending of $5.6 million on a staff retreat. The new board is tasked with driving efficiency and strategic changes to meet training needs of Jamaica. The board is also expected to ensure that policy directives are followed by management. Now, Professor Wint is a noted researcher and academic. He is a professor of international business and is a former pro-vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies. And it's now time for a break here on the Midday News, but please stay with us. We'll have much more stories when we return. Welcome back. We're continuing the news. The opposition People's National Party is calling for the resignation of National Security Minister Dr. Horace Chang. The party had a press conference this morning where party president Mark Golding led the list of criticisms in various sectors, chief among them what he deemed an inefficient response to murders.
This government has totally mismanaged the national security of our country. Jamaica has witnessed a 10% increase in murders in 2021 and a 19% increase in murders over the first 3 or so weeks of 2022, with 112 people being killed in just 23 days. Jamaica cannot go on like this. There must be accountability for such poor performance in the critical area of our national security.
Pointing to the JCF's latest serious crimes report, which reflected a 15.5% increase in murders so far this year, Mr. Golding took aim at the security minister and the police commissioner.
He clearly cannot bring the vision, energy, and vigor and communication skills which that portfolio requires. We are therefore calling on the Prime Minister to relieve him of his duties in that portfolio and give someone else an opportunity to bring a fresh and hopefully more effective approach. Commissioner of Police, Anthony Anderson, is also hereby being put on warning.
To all the news, with the Ministry of Health reporting an overwhelming demand for beds at hospitals, forcing them to go into emergency mode, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Jacqueline Bisesa McKenzie has sought to clarify that this is not only due to COVID-19 cases. Dr. Bisesa McKenzie says each year from late October to March the following year, the general admissions at hospitals are usually high. She also said this is because going into the holiday season in December, there are more interpersonal violence and road crashes.
So there, from trauma, there is an increased numbers, and then also from the complications of non-communicable diseases, we tend to have more persons tend to not be so compliant with their medications during the holiday period, and that kind of stretches across into the new year. We also tend to have more detection of illnesses because we have a lot of relatives coming from overseas and a lot of people who may have been neglected in some way, attention is now placed on them.
Additionally, the CMO said there is also a change in temperature at the end of the year going into February the following year, and so they see more respiratory cases.
So you tend to have more illnesses that are associated with that in terms of respiratory illnesses, that we would see more asthma cases, more flu-like illnesses and other, even though right now we have not necessarily detected influenza type A or B in the samples that we're seeing. There are other respiratory viruses that are out there, and they tend to be, this is a time of the year that we tend to see a lot of that. So we're still in the flu season.
10 more people have died from COVID-19, increasing the overall death toll to 2,609. 559 people are now hospitalized with the virus. 60 are severely ill, while 24 are critically ill. The country recorded 754 new COVID-19 cases on Monday from 2,812 samples. 19 of the cases are imported. The overall case count is now 121,436. The country's positivity rate is now 46%. 88 people have recovered from the virus. The total recoveries now stand at 68,551. 610,562 people have been vaccinated against the virus. And for the latest in, well, here's now is the midday news. international and regional roundup.
In regional news, the Trinidad and Tobago government says secondary school students in forms 1 to 3 will be required to attend classes at least twice a week when schools reopen for physical classes on February 7, following their closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Ministry of Education said those students will be allowed to resume face-to-face classes on a rotational basis, and that there would also be a relaxation of school uniform rules, particularly with types and colors of shoes. It said the details of this arrangement for each school will be communicated to parents and students by principals. And those were the top regional and international stories. I'm Sandy Williams.
And for the latest in the financial world, here's Cody and Barrett with the Business Minute.
October 2021 showed a continued decline in the use of checks for various transactions in Jamaica. In the latest Bank of Jamaica Payment Systems Bulletin, there were 550,000 check transactions valued at $83 million. 630,000 transactions valued at $92 million were reported during the same period in 2020. This reflects the lowest monthly value and volume of transactions done by check over the past 3 years. In news overseas, Johnson & Johnson is projecting that its COVID vaccine would generate more than $3 billion in sales in 2022. This after posting a mixed fourth quarter report that slightly beat earnings estimates but missed on revenue. J&J's fourth quarter profits surged to $4.74 billion, almost triple the $1.74 billion it earned during the same quarter the previous year. Its revenue of $24.8 billion rose 10.4% from $22.48 billion during the same quarter in 2020, mostly driven by $1.82 billion in international sales of its COVID vaccine. And that's it for the Business Minute.
And we now head to a quick break. When we come back, Renardo Brown has the Midday Sports.
Welcome back. It's now time for your Midday Sports. A strike action was averted at Caymanas Park on Tuesday as stakeholders and local promoters of horse racing, Supreme Ventures Racing and Entertainment Limited, SVREL, came to an agreement in their purse increase negotiations. Stakeholders voted last Thursday at a meeting held at Caymanas Park to forego the nomination of horses on Tuesday until their demands of a purse increase were met. This after negotiating for 6 months, and were told by SVREL that their 10% request cannot be granted, but instead a performance incentive was added. Now on Monday, SVREL proposed that a one-time incentive of $50,000 will be added to every race except futurity races and races in the road for the Triple Crown, which were already announced. The incentive for first to sixth place is valued at $18 million and will take effect February 1, 2022. President of the United Racehorse Trainers Association of Jamaica, Ryan Darby, told TVJ Sports that the purse negotiation team accepted the proposed offer in the interest of racing, and horses will be nominated for race days scheduled for Saturday, January 29th and Sunday, the 30th. Rafael Nadal overcame physical issues to beat Canada's Denis Shapovalov 6-3, 6-4, 4-6, 3-6, 6-3 and reach the Australian Open semi-finals. Nadal, whose only title at Melbourne Park came in 2009, needed medication for what seemed to be a stomach issue. The 35-year-old sixth seed will next play Matteo Berrettini in the last four. Seventh seed Berrettini fought back to beat France's Gail Monfils 6-4, 6-4, 3-6, 3-6, 6-2 to become the first Italian man to reach the Australian Open semi-finals. On the women's side, world number one and home favorite Ashley Barty thrashed Jessica Pegula 6-2, 6-love to underline why she is a title favorite. Barty, bidding to become the first Australian singles champion in the tournament since 1978, has yet to drop a set at Melbourne Park. She will set up a semi-final against American Madison Keys. Keys earlier swept past French Open champion Barbora Krejcikova 6-3, 6-2. 4 teams will go in search of their first win of the 2021-22 Jamaica Premier League season as the competition continues today with 2 games at the Captain Horace Burrell Centre of Excellence. At 1 p.m., former champions Portmore United and Arnett Gardens will meet with the Junglists looking for their first point of the season. When the two met last season, Arnett ran out 3-1 winners after Portmore took a 9th-minute lead. Portmore drew their opening game 1-1 with Tivoli Gardens, while Arnett went down 2-1 to Cavalier in the season opener. In the other game at 3:15, Malines United will oppose Veer United. And Watford are set to appoint former England boss Roy Hodgson as their new manager. The Hornets are keen to make a swift appointment following Claudio Ranieri's dismissal on Monday, with the club in the Premier League's bottom three. Hodgson, who is 74, has been out of the game since leaving Crystal Palace at the end of last season. At the time, he said he wanted to take a break from the game, but did not rule out a return at some point. Watford want to give Ranieri's replacement as much time as possible to work with the team before a crucial Premier League trip to fellow strugglers Burnley on February 5. And that's it for your Midday Sports Report. Giovanni, it's back to you.
Thanks, Renardo. And that's it for the Midday News. I'm Giovanni Dennis. Join us at 7 for Primetime News. On behalf of the news, sports and production teams, have a good afternoon.